So what are we doing today?
We're watching Ratatouille.
Have you seen Ratatouille before?
No, I haven't.
Can you tell me why?
Because it's got rats in it.
What are your thoughts on rats?
I don't like them.
Do you know where
I have a phobia.
You have a phobia?
I do.
What are your thoughts on Stuart Little?
I didn't like that either. I thought
Yeah.
it was stupid. And I didn't like reading 1984.
Do you think that's where it came from? Or
No, I think I had it before then.
just always?
Yeah. Might go back to a news report when I was a kid of a mouse plague in like Western Victoria or somewhere. And they had this footage on the TV of these mice just crawling absolutely everywhere and people talking about them sort of crawling on them. And I think I had this thing, I just had this vision of being asleep in bed and mice all crawling all over me. I think maybe that's where it started.
Is there a reason you've stayed clear of like an animated rat movie though? Or you just haven't gotten around to it?
No, I just haven't watched it. Yeah.
Do you expect to be a little ill about it, or?
I don't think so.
What are your thoughts on Pixar in general?
I like Pixar.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, watched a few of them when the kids were little, growing up.
Any standouts for you?
I love the Toy Stories.
Yeah.
And Nemo.
Yeah.
Oh, Monsters Inc. was alright. Yeah. I like Woody and Buzz, the interaction and that. Yeah.
I remember when I first watched Ratatouille, it was done in an exchange for a deal that you and Dad made with me. I was reading a lot of Del Toro quests and stuff, and you wanted me to read more like serious fiction and stuff. So you gave me a book called The Chosen, like about, I think, two Jewish boys in some kind of school
In New York, yeah.
in New York being friends and stuff. I remember so little about it because I was quite young, but you said if you read this book, you can go watch a movie that's along with that and you get to pick. And I heard a radio ad for Ratatouille at one point while I was like halfway through the book. I was like, that's the one I want to watch. Shall we watch the film?
Yeah, okay.
Cool. And then you'll get to tell me what you think of it afterward.
Alright.
If we make it through. You don't relate to this character? What do you think of Ratatouille, Dad?
Long time since I've seen it. I thought it was ingenious. It was clever. Thought-provoking.
Now that you've seen Ratatouille, Mum.
I can't lost.
So what did you think of the film?
It's a film.
Well, could you stand the rat element? Was that okay? Was there any moments?
It was a bit silly. It's a bit like Stuart Little, the family adopting a rat as a child.
Yeah.
But, it's a movie. It's
Yeah.
animation. When all the rats are in the restaurant, that's a bit,
Yeah. Climbing up the health inspector's car.
Yeah, when they're all in the fridge.
Yeah. Because they hadn't been through the dishwasher then, so they are all dirty and gross still.
The story's a bit different from what I expected, but
What do you
those
think?
that you least expect to be able to do something are capable of doing more than you expect them to be able to do.
That's what you got from it?
Yeah. Message that, don't underestimate people. Don't write people off on appearances, I suppose, or preconceptions.
Would you let a rat into your kitchen?
No.
It's gonna help. Whoopsie dude. In many ways, the work of a critic is easy. They just point at the movie they see the most of themselves in and go, yeah, that one's pretty good, isn't it? The online critic/creator likes the movie with thoughts about criticism and art. Colour absolutely none of you surprised. Since Ratatouille is definitely a film far more easily categorized as a family-friendly drama, I think, than an adventure film like a lot of Pixar's work, recapping the story line by line isn't exactly the best way to understand it. It is a very, very silly film, but it's also an atmosphere-first production. What you need to know about the narrative, or what might jog your memory a little bit, is that it's a story about Remy, a rat who likes to cook, who buddies up with a klutz, no-talent garbage boy named Linguini in the kitchen of a restaurant in Paris. The restaurant is struggling after the death of its renowned head chef, Chef Gusteau, who's an inspiration to Remy and was something of a public champion of the idea that anyone can cook. Paris's top food critic Anton Ego did not agree with this notion, and his review of Gusteau's about 2 years prior to the film's events was so scathing that it cost the restaurant one of its 5 stars, and Gusteau died shortly thereafter. The current head chef, Chef Skinner, is quite aggressive in the kitchen, but seems to be more concerned with using Gusteau's name to sell microwave foods and living by the example that Gusteau set as an artist, like Remy tries to do. Remy and Linguini make an unlikely pair, with the rat learning to puppeteer Linguini through his hair, quickly becoming, as my buddies at In Excess would say, a new sensation. Colette, another cook in the kitchen, teaches both of them about cooking, and she and Linguini eventually begin a relationship. Remy eventually finds his rat family again too, who are still a bit uneasy about him hanging out with humans, but Remy's brother Emile wants him to start stealing food from the kitchen to give to his rat colony. This leads eventually to Remy discovering that Linguini is actually Gusteau's son, making him the rightful owner of the restaurant. Skinner is kicked out after trying to cover up that fact, and the restaurant begins to embrace its artistry amongst its rise back to prominence when Anton Ego resurfaces and challenges Linguini to impress him. After betraying Linguini's trust by stealing food from the kitchen and being kidnapped by Skinner to make a new line of frozen foods, because, Skinner's discovered that Remy is the cook, Remy realizes he wants to be part of the kitchen as himself, not hiding behind anybody else. And while not every one of the cooks at Gusteau's accepts this or understands it, Remy, the rat colony, led by his dad who finally accepts Remy for who he wants to be, Linguini and Colette manage to blow Anton Ego's socks so far off to the extent he bloody reckons Remy's the best there is. They all start a new smaller restaurant once the Gusteau's is shut down for being contaminated with rats, and things end with everybody having been accepted for the best and Remy being able to be the chef that he always wanted to be as himself. Now, to begin on the obvious note, Ratatouille joins the likes of Up, The Good Dinosaur, and WALL-E's First Half, as well as a few others in the small club of particular Pixar films that are that extra special kind of weird. This movie is pretty damn strange. A rat puppeteering a human by his hair has been lovingly and rightfully lampooned by everyone and everything, from your buddy Dylan on the Minecraft group chat to actual Best Picture winning films. So everyone knows that it's a bit cooked, but everyone knows it's a bit special too. It's gonna be so hard not to just do food puns for this entire video, tell you what. This movie rocks, dude. I think it's really good. I love nearly everything about it. The cast, the design, the setting, the message, the tone, the jokes, the animation and filmmaking. I love this movie. Makes me happy just to watch it. It just gets it, you know? It just understands. Ratatouille knows how to put forward emotion, tension, fun, and laughs with commitment and sincerity, standing by both the downplayed feelings and the slapstick silliness with grace, good humor, and a feeling like it's enjoying itself while it plays. That sincerity, no matter what it's going for, is so crucial. Whether it's the highway attention and chase sequences down a drain system in rural France, or an extended scene simply showing you around a kitchen, to crazy paranoid rants about family lineage and rat conspiracies spouted from the mouth of a caricature, Ratatouille believes in and stands behind everything that it does, plays it through honestly, which is perhaps the only reason why its artsiness takes a while to notice. It pulls off the premise and the various tones without it ever feeling like an indulgent mess, because it's just doing it so naturally. The story is ridiculous and very off the wall, but it still wants to, and does quite successfully, say something quite lovely and special by not being in a sense of denial about its ridiculousness. It stays character first, and gives the Pixar qualities to a story which I think would, even quite obviously in many other hands, feel like a far lesser film in every regard. Ratatouille was originally conceived in the year 2000 by Jim Pinkava, who had previously directed Pixar's short Jerry's Game and paired with production designer Harley Jessup for this rat cooking movie. The main characters in the story were developed throughout the next few years entirely in-house, as Ratatouille was originally going to be the first Pixar film outside of their distribution deal with Disney at the time. This meant Disney didn't really have a look in on this movie for most of its development. Eventually, Pixar were apparently unhappy with how the story was taking shape, wanted it to really get moving, so control of the project was given to Brad Bird, who was relatively fresh off of The Incredibles. He used the same characters while reconfiguring the film and rewrote the story into what we see today. Bird made changes big and small. For instance, originally Gusteau was still alive throughout the movie and had his own story and arc. From what I can tell, it might have had something to do with him needing to pull himself up out of a rut and find his thirst to create again after Ego's review. When Bird was running into length problems, he realized there were simply too many characters and too many stories, so Gusteau was killed and rewritten, only keeping him as a projection representing Remy's inner monologue, which helped cut down on the amount of plot lines in the film. Bird apparently focused the film much more heavily on Remy and his perspective, who would also become a more appealing character, which also meant an altered tone from the original pitch and a shift in the core idea of the story, which I'm guessing means the message and the actual theme that it speaks to. From what I can tell, obviously I don't have insider knowledge or anything, but peering between the lines of what my reading has unveiled, Ratatouille seems like it was originally going to play into the dirty and scary nature of rats a bit more strongly than we see. And a lot of work was done afterward to alter that perspective to make rats in general and the feeling of the film a lot friendlier. I obviously don't know what the original pitch for the movie would have resulted in, but I think I can fairly confidently say the things I like about this movie seem as though they came through these later adjustments and rewrites. Jim Pencarver still contributed enormously to the project and was given a co-story credit on the film. Bird's appointment to the movie in later stages meant that he'd have to handle his duties very differently from The Incredibles, which he'd originally pitched and helmed from start to finish. Ratatouille meant that he was handed a lot of material, characters, designs, a general plot, a team with personnel that he wasn't familiar with, who weren't familiar with him, who had already been attached to the project for years. His job was to bring together the film's parts into what we enjoy now. While of course every single film at Pixar is an enormous collaborative effort and not all credit goes to just a handful of people, so many people contributed here, there's still a statistic here along with Brad Bird that I quite enjoy. As a result of rolling with these punches and his work here, Bird is quite possibly at the helm of one of the best 3 feature runs in American directorial history, certainly within animation. The Iron Giant to The Incredibles to Ratatouille is a seriously upper echelon level of work of 3 films which contained sharp emotional points, humor, and heart while retaining global appeal and lasting years beyond their original release. Their box office numbers may have varied at the time, but what doesn't is the love that they've earned and the adventure that they still deliver on decades later. What's most impressive to me about this is that they each also showcase completely different approaches to story development. The Iron Giant was an adaptation of a short novel, tapping into a lot of the culture and hysteria of the time in which it's set. I've read the book and it bears almost only superficial resemblance to what the story is on film, laying really only a foundation. The Incredibles is a different idea. It's an original brainchild, built from the ground up using completely original characters, and while something of a response to superhero media in general, is very much tied to the core appeal of superheroes as I discussed in my last episode, which makes it a strong and relatable piece of fiction from a lot of different sides. Ratatouille became a late-stage rework of a pitch and a story which already existed for this format, mining it and reworking it into a new assemblage. As someone who has a great love of learning about how production cycles affect the end products of certain media, finding that Brad Bird co-wrote and directed 3 immensely valuable animated films within a 10-year period from 3 completely different development standpoints is just enormously impressive to me. There's a lot of luck involved in this kind of thing, but at the same time, it takes a great deal of love for the field, a very well-developed creative instinct, and a fantastic ability to work within a range of departments and personnel to be at the helm of 3 projects like this within a career at all, much less in a row. Ratatouille is, as an artsy and strange product, a film I like from the outset in how it feels like a chance, like a long shot, a film that isn't being usual or conventional. It's an all-ages production that, as a kid, I walked out of feeling like I'd seen a new level of film, but without that being attached like Wall-E to any sense of intimidation or overbearing spectacle or dominance. It felt more inviting than that. It wasn't a movie I remember hulking over me. It felt like and feels like it understands, respects, and likes the audience that it's trying to give itself to, while obviously not abiding by normal screenwriting pacing rules. Yeah, it's silly and over the top, but it's also expressive of emotions that feel central to a lot of people, including younger audiences, whom it always felt like it was trying to engage on an earnest level as much as anyone else. As I get older, I appreciate it more and more for its being able to balance those 2 extremes. It did take me until these last few watches to realize one of the major reasons why that happens, though. The film doesn't intimidate with its strangeness is actually down to the narration and the presence of that Gusteau figment. 2 very simple devices which help to explain how Remy is feeling at any point. It eases the delivery a lot. The film is introduced with Remy in voiceover doing, of all things, a big old, "This is, me. I bet you're wondering how I got here." And at the end we see that he's been telling telling a story of how his new restaurant came to be to a group of other rats. It's a little corny, sure, because even within that context, the narration, more often than not in the movie, isn't a crucial aspect of the story beat by beat. It typically reinforces visuals and acting that we can already see. So while I could criticize the narration for being superfluous, I think the effect is a friendlier feeling film, which absolutely is a direction I think it's best that it goes in. It feels very much there to soften the entry, to demystify this weirdness, which I think is very important for the demographic that this film was likely to reach at the time. The Gusteau figment is similar. If I wanted to be a stickler, I'd point out how Gusteau is a somewhat blunt expository device, and often simply spells out things we could infer any number of ways, and how Remy hallucinating the ghost of his hero is a little weird. However, the same perspective stands. For a film with a premise this odd, taking place in an environment a lot less fantastical than like a scaring factory, the depths of the ocean, or a secret island headquarters, with exceptionally little action really, it's really worthwhile to add in some more fantasy elements to balance it out a bit, especially since it teaches younger audiences about the workings of a kitchen in a very friendly way. It doesn't have animals talking to humans outright, so it has this instead. Would I like to see a version of the story that doesn't have the narration? Sure, that might be something interesting, but it's not as though I think either choice actually hurts the movie, and what I think it gains is huge. It becomes an unconventional film I was able to connect with as a child and maintained my affection through adolescence. For me, when approaching it, I definitely want the film to feel really friendly, that like approachable and sunny, and especially when based in a kitchen, which isn't a rare place to set a story, there's an ability for things within a kitchen to get very nasty and stressful. I've spent long enough in hospitality jobs that watching films or shows based in kitchens or food prep, even lighthearted reality TV, can just really not feel very relaxing a lot of the time. Watching a show like The Bear that accurately recreates the business of a real kitchen, no thanks.
I don't need to play. I've lived it.
I might revere a lot of the darker Pixar films just as a rule. Some of that's my age, some of that's my disposition, but as I've said before, darkness and stress is not the end of the road. I love a balanced tone so I can feel better at the other side. I want it to feel sunny at the end of the day, and that feels more powerful if you go through some shit to begin with. And if there's one thing Ratatouille does really well, it's make me feel good. It's a friendly movie that has some cartoonish malcontent and tension from the likes of Skinner. Ego is certainly intimidating, but in this very stylized way, which conveys why he carries weight in the story, but never feels genuinely frightening to me as a viewer. His office being shaped like a coffin, I think, is perhaps one of the only times where a Pixar design genuinely looks like a DreamWorks choice. Ratatouille feels like it escapes that kitchen pressure cooker feeling of tension by just being nice. It's a relatively low stakes, fun, silly movie that has heart and knows how to work that setting in a particular direction to get the most out of it from the perspective of a rat without it becoming like a complete one-to-one reflection of how it's a job. These people are working. I don't want to sit and watch a movie about people just doing their job most of the time. It's not really a stressful watch for me except until the end when every chef walks out and that work part of my brain goes like, there are people waiting for their food. Don't leave. There's work to be done. What are you looking at the rat for? Close the door. This order's 7 minutes late. I need you at your station. I do think, even while it's a really nice feeling film, the environment of a kitchen is a bold choice for Pixar at this time. While Ratatouille is not as on the face ambitious as something like The Incredibles, I think it's still like a lot of work in a quieter way, and it's all because it spends so much time in one location. Because of the amount of time we spend in this one location, because of how many different perspectives it needs to be shot from, the kitchen at Gusteau's would turn out to be one of the most detailed and lovingly crafted spaces for Pixar yet. The Incredibles may have had more sets, I'm not sure on the statistics, but a great deal of the sets in The Incredibles rely pretty heavily on the focus that you'll no doubt be paying to the people in the shots. A lot of the locations look quite bare or simple. Syndrome's headquarters is pretty stark, you're not getting a lot of props and stuff. The athletic field at the end, look at what's going on in the distance there. You get it. This is not the case in Ratatouille, and especially not here in the kitchen. This is a top-to-tail, exhaustively detailed spot. Countertops to pots, shelf ingredients to undersides of stoves and interiors of ovens and sinks, windows and skylights and door handles, time card punches, the chef's office, so much of the film takes place in this one location, and it's daunting to imagine hemming yourself into such a tight spot on so many levels of production here. However, if you're going to hem yourself into a location, I think a kitchen is quite observably one of the most multifaceted storytelling arenas that you can go to. The benefit of choosing food as the artistic focus is multifold, since food is an arena with such a wide dynamic to it. There's haute cuisine, the realm of artistry and precision and excess, but food is also a key to culture, a key to love, family relationships, a key to self-expression and connection. The ritual of sharing, of giving or receiving love, uniting over a meal, and above all, it's also sustenance. You need it to live. So when contrasting the setting of Ratatouille to other Pixar films starring artists, while not everyone has the experience of being a musician for a film like Coco or Soul, maybe they don't play that much sport, or they're not really interested in racing like Lightning McQueen is in Cars. Maybe they don't have that much of a personal way into a film like Onward or Finding Nemo if their bonds with family are less important to them. Every single person watching this movie has a relationship with food that this film may in some way allow them to consider. If your target audience is people who eat and drink, you're making a movie for every person on the planet. The film doesn't have to create 4 different characters in the family like The Incredibles to try to hit every person in the audience. The setting and the film's approach to it is already the equivalent of like a sun in a solar system of appeal, and you don't have to do a whole lot of work filling in those gaps. The audience are going to do it for you because they have a relationship to the sun. There are a few of their films where I feel they really permit themselves to focus entirely on such a narrow setting, but they do it here because mining this one thing from as many different angles as possible actually increases its chances of reaching a wider audience. It's very aware that everybody has the ability to see something in it because it's about food, and food could be representative of anything. Not just because of the relationships people have with food, but food could also be a stand-in for any other art that someone could be involved with. It helps that the backdrop of the kitchen is laid onto Paris visually, which at the time was only the second real-life city that Pixar had ever put one of their stories in. Sydney was present for Finding Nemo, which, like the Sydney Harbour, does feel fun and unique for the film at the time, but it's not really exhaustively shown. Ratatouille isn't necessarily an entirely gospel-accurate version of Paris. It leans deliberately into this very spiritual direction, trying to capture what the filmmakers felt with the romantic, aged aspects of the city, but it is much more detailed an approach than Sydney was. As a result, environmentally, I think Ratatouille is basically spotless. The art team's trips into the city of Paris would have them taking photos of Paris from shoe height, so they could accurately replicate and capture the details of the stones and walkways and gutters and drains from the perspective of a rat, really low to the ground. Brad Bird's own venture to Paris had him walking along the Seine, a nearly 800-kilometer long river in France that runs right through the heart of Paris. He so loved the atmosphere of the place at night that he based one of the new scenes that he wrote for the film in that same spot, trying to capture that feeling artistically. Very few of the locations in this movie feel new. They feel old and used and settled into the earth. Props are aged and maintained over time, which contrasts very well often with the clothing, which does feel newer, starchier. Paris has this handmade, sculpted feeling to it, where the building materials are important and all look worn by weather and time. Within the chronology of Pixar, I do feel confident in saying this was the first time when environmentally the films started feeling this way. I said the dated nature of the visuals of the film starts disappearing with Cars, which still looks like a new movie for the most part, which was right before Ratatouille. But by the time we get here, basically the only visual look I'm not quite sold on the entire time is Remy and Emile getting zapped by lightning. I think visually the rest of the film is inscrutable, and it's the first time that rooms, buildings, materials, desks, kitchen, pots and pans and lamps and stuff start showing this level of detail. Like the detail on individual assets when you pause the film to look at it, almost any point of it, not only feels considered, but rich and meaningful and adding important atmosphere to the film. The movie sinks into the floor a little bit like an old, polished piece of furniture, like it's been there a while before you got there, heavy and comfortable no matter how many plates you're going to put on it. This is also an effect of the music. Once again, the absolute GOAT, Michael Giacchino, everybody. Somebody stop this man. I feel like I'm repeating myself constantly when it comes to his work with Pixar. He simply provides the most invigorating, versatile, and iconic score work for their movies. Bar none, his work is simply the most invisibly powerful element of any Pixar film that he touches. No two signature approaches sound alike. No two approaches serve the films less than beautifully. I adore the fluid nature in which he weaves through any concept with ease. In Inside Out, it's delicate and soft and bouncy. In Incredibles, it's bold and jazzy and bright. In Ratatouille, it's grounded and romantic and beautiful, playing with airy instruments and evoking the feeling of France's beauty in the music as equally as rat feet like tip-tapping over countertops. It's breathtaking work to slowly build songs throughout scenes like it occasionally does, like adding in one ingredient at a time until the entire dish of music comes together and hits you all at once. The leitmotifs and repeated themes switch instruments and tempos at different times and often eschews large orchestral sounds for extraordinarily subdued, intimate arrangements. The music of Ratatouille is just so much fun and complements this extremely detailed world visually deliciously. This same environment, the kitchen, is a place that we continually come back to, so making sure that it's shot from different perspectives, scenes are staged in new areas so it doesn't feel repetitive over the course of the film is really important. The perspectives we get into the kitchen begins with Remy, handily explaining the roles of the kitchen hierarchy to begin with before plummeting down. The first introduction is as fun to watch as it is tense and deft in how it shows the operation and business of the kitchen. It really makes the most of displaying just in how many ways it's not built for a rat to navigate safely, before we see the opposite, the way the chaos of the kitchen is in service to this beautiful, deep velvet warmth in the restaurant itself. Keeping this entire sequence from Remy's perspective helps everything feel very grounded in his character, and is one of the many times we'll see the kitchen through a different lens. We never really return to this exact feeling from the camera again, even while Remy is walking around on the ground in the kitchen rather a lot throughout the movie. We start with the bird's eye, and then from ground level, underneath, really up close. We spend some time in the soup area, and then each different scene in the kitchen seems to stretch the environment so we get a different look into it. I have so much respect for how well the film is able to keep the one environment so appealing throughout the runtime. The place we keep coming back to time after time is shown in so many different ways. It's not just visual too, it's how to make the most of it atmospherically as well. To show you like how nervous Remy is at first, to slowly shift things scene by scene. He goes from scrambling, unable to stay still lest he perish, to observing everything from the top of someone's head, to eventually running the entire place calling out orders. To slowly evolve the atmosphere of the kitchen as relevant to his character was a huge consideration, and I think is very effectively nailed. It's also the area in which the vast majority of the human characters are introduced and concentrated, and aside from a few big major players, we only see people inside the kitchen. The cooks don't have that much to do with the story, but each of them does feel just written and separate enough from the others, with the exception of this guy. Who is this man? To feel like a real ragtag group of people from all over the world concentrated in one place. These elements of character are baked into how they speak, how they move, how they react in the small scenes, so even if I don't know their names, I still feel as though I have enough of a grasp on who they are and they contribute a presence to the scenes. But the major players are obviously Linguini, Colette, and Chef Skinner. Now, Linguini was played by Pixar's own Lou Romano, who has had a very long career in various Disney art departments and all around the traps of various animation studios. He played Bernie in The Incredibles, but was also the production designer for that film, which is a huge role, a lighting and character designer for various other Pixar projects, and since 2009 has bounced around a lot of different animation studios, including Leica, who make incredible stop motion work. Lou Romano is behind the scenes, very well known, and from what I can tell, quite well regarded. It seems, however, in casting the voice for a character like Linguini, who would be a nervous, bumbling, but lovable klutz, Brad Bird wanted him and basically asked him to perform the character with as many of his own vocal mannerisms and quirks as possible. To listen to any interview of Lou Romano is quite uncanny. He gave so much of his normal nature to this performance that you close your eyes and it just sounds like Linguini.
I had to use the bathroom, and you know, when you're in those environments, you just go where you can. It just ended up that was where everyone then went to huddle when it was raining. I mean, so they called it the loo, because loo is toilet in England, and my name's Lou, so.
What we get is an electric character who comes to life, I think, as fully as any Pixar character ever has, with glorious physical animation and a perfect voice. The reason animating Linguini was a particular challenge is that he is the heart and physical soul of the film, almost entirely for both the humor and the narrative. Human animation in, like, The Incredibles, as I discussed, is difficult because everyone in the audience is an expert on how people move, but here you have a character who needs to stand out amongst that challenge. Skinner is very animated as well, but in a very different different, far more caricatured way. If Skinner is performing between poses, Linguini needed to look more fluid. With everything that he does, he is the slapstick core of the movie, even while not being controlled by Remy. He's loose, he's big, he's expressive, and not very well coordinated. Since animation is all about the details of movement and animators can spend months on singular shots, each movement is going to be very considered and deliberate, which is actually the opposite of how you need Linguini to behave. He is about capturing spontaneity. When he spins twice around himself to catch the letter in his back pocket like a dog chasing his tail, his initial spilling of the soup and then hurling out the window, him struggling to get the bike into his apartment, him accidentally knocking Remy into the Seine, which I forgot and fully got me this time, great joke. These touches of his movement draw attention to this idea and plant this seed before we even get to the puppeteering sections. It subconsciously primes you for those sections by making us pay attention to his movement before we get there. It makes him look oddly vulnerable to it. Then add in the fold after that when he is being puppeteered by Remy, any of those movements will often look completely involuntary to him. He'll be moving with equal expression, but he's not in control, moving like a crane would with an operator from an observation window. He's like a vehicle that Remy is driving, swiveling his head and body around in these very unnatural ways that he has no control over. He's surrendering his facilities to a different creature and then needs to react to his own movement. When Remy is controlling him, his head and facial expressions are completely separate to his body, reacting a second or two late to things that he's watching himself do, which is such a vividly observed concept that is hard to figure out. He's watching what he's doing and then having to explain it away to people in real time as he starts doing something else. This would also, in some circumstances, include the camera to enhance the effect even more. It seems to react to his movements late, achieved by animating some scenes in full motion from 4 different angles and then choosing the shots afterward. The handheld, bouncy nature of the camera is part of the physical expression of Linguini in these scenes. It's like, oh, where'd you go? Oh, you went over there? Oh, what are you doing over here now? I didn't expect you to go there. That kind of thing. You got like invisible motion tracking, gliding up through pipes for Remy, handheld for Linguini. Perfect contrast. Can you say ridiculous? Because I think I can. The only film between The Incredibles, the first time humans were the main cast, and this was Cars, where there weren't any humans at all. To go from figuring out how to do humans full stop to this level of really pushing the boundaries of physical expression with them, I think is a real testament to the restlessness of Pixar at this time. Constantly looking for the next challenge, the next way to use their tools and their knowledge to tell unique stories when it seemed impossible before they try. As a result of how complex the movement style for Linguini is, and how he'd need to be reacting to his own involuntary movement within certain sequences, Lou Romano would often improvise reactions to alpha animated scenes as they played before him in animatic, making up the dialogue on the spot. This improv barking style of bumbling adds so much to some of these scenes. He truly sounds as spontaneous as he looks. As a result, I might even dare to say that if we're talking singular characters, I think Linguini might be up there alongside Hank the Octopus and Joy from Inside Out as some of the most stunning character work from Pixar, full stop. The man feels believably expressive for every second, but also beautifully human, and while conveying so much physically, the voice and facial work is completely in line at all times. I never once questioned the authenticity of what's going on here. I feel as though I completely understand what he's feeling at all times. It's just beautiful work. A bewilderingly, dizzyingly funny character who is given a tremendous arc and written in such a human and relatable way, while secretly being this enormous vehicle for so much story, so much humor, and so much of the character of the movie. So much of the entire film only works because he as a character does. His physicality is a linchpin for the entirety of the story, and from like nearly every angle, humor, plot, and I want to make sure that I express and appreciate that. Linguini's fucking fantastic. Skinner is also a very expressive character physically, and design-wise leans into a type of caricature which the film mines for a lot of its humor and low-stakes tension within the film's middle section. He's performed very adeptly by the late great Ian Holm, whose energy and elasticity is used to marvelous effect. How he can seem like a powerful, intense, and angry character, but also really paranoid and insecure, helps draw really clear lines at the edges of his power. The kitchen is where he seems imposing, but step foot anywhere beyond it, and he feels entirely different, which I think is of great credit to how well synced the animating acting is to Holmes' performance here. Dare I say he's got that Lord Farquaad energy, but the character has dimension and layers and isn't completely on the nose. The highlight for me of his design is actually his teeth, though. They're so forward and such an enormous part of his facial work. I've complimented teeth 2 episodes in a row now. What am I doing? As a character, he seems to be written as something of an artistic antithesis to Remy, clearly seeing more value in the basic operation and the money involved in his field than the artistry. He's using Gusteau's name to create microwave meals and cheap food to keep the business afloat, but seems to take very little pride in his actual work. He's never really shown cooking, merely ordering people around. Yet the irony of his small, with dignity, line couldn't be lost on anybody. Skinner represents the commerce of art as something of a leech on the genuine truth of expression, clinging to the side of other people's achievements as long as it benefits him to do so, and preferring to maintain the status quo rather than shoot for new truths within the field. His full opposite is Remy toward the end, when Remy is acting as the head chef in the kitchen, loves what he does, is teaching, guiding, directly involved in the creation. Skinner couldn't stand the idea of Linguini's talent bringing in any more attention for the business if it might detract from the brand recognition of Gusteau, and seemed to inflict lessons onto Linguini like he was trying to break him, where someone like Remy would probably delight in a student showing promise. It shows this perspective on 2 different kinds of creatives in the same role really well. And while I do think Skinner isn't as funny to me as he used to be, he serves the function of the film really well as a highlight to the middle ground between Remy and Ego. Remy is someone who builds, has ambition, and wants to create new things. Ego is someone who at least is implied to destroy things, but Skinner is the middle ground, the less evil on the face, coasting along under the radar grub of the art world, and I think it's a very crucial area that the plot covers. Colette is also a really interesting character with some very clever tropes in her that I think hit a particular set of things that I have a very strong affinity for. A woman with a harsh exterior, staunch beliefs, who stands on her own, is an expert in her field, but has a real core of softness that you have to work to get to, is a particular type of character that I regularly adore. Colette is one of them. Others would be Reza Hawkeye from Full Metal Alchemist, Cassandra Pendergast from Dragon Age, Abby from The Last of Us Part 2. This is just a type of character I have found really works for me, and I find I often relate very strongly to. Colette carving out her own place as the only woman in the kitchen, and being a real tough teacher, but someone who clearly loves food and cooking and takes great pride in her craft, as well as really caring about the people around her, is baked into so much of her writing, her animation, and the heart she provides to the movie. There's a lot of depth with her, conveying her harsh exterior as if it was built over years of putting up with tough conditions of kitchens, but her deeply felt interior love for food, for sharing and teaching, and eventually for Linguini as a man who she trusts, is convincingly and I think quite movingly portrayed. I love her arc toward the end as much as any of the other characters. When she nearly slaps Linguini for lying, the emotion she shows through that scene, and then on the bike, and when she returns to the kitchen, she still feels fired up and annoyed. Like, there's no apology or complete character shift. She feels remarkably consistent, carrying that pride in Gusteau's most cherished belief the whole film, and presented as being like likable competition to Remy, a character who she doesn't even know about for the whole movie. Her moment of reflection alone in bed at night after the Ratatouille and sharing with Ego the truth of Remy's abilities feels as though she doesn't know what's going to happen, shown next to Linguini's like peace with the situation. These characters just feel so real sometimes. Now, this is all fantastic work, but at some point we are going to have to talk about the narrative itself, which is the trickiest part of the movie. I hate to come off sounding like I know more about story work than I actually do. I'm just sitting in my house guessing, but I think looking at the film the last few rewatches and seeing it against the stories of a bunch of other Pixar works, it gets easier to see why the story might have taken so long to develop, and what the particular challenges that it needed to get past that might have been really hard. Ratatouille is unlike a lot of Pixar films in that beyond the concept of it like a rat in a kitchen, it's a story which isn't necessarily conflict driven. It's in a completely unlikely environment with a remarkably limited scope, a working class story, but how do you make that exciting? How do you give that an end goal and a direction? What do the characters actually want in this situation, and how do you force a feeling of momentum when their goals are really relatively achievable. I've spoken before about time pressures in Pixar movies, the end goal that the characters are striving for. The thing that they get to is often set up really early in the film because it's just so crucial. Whether it's a desire, like Wall-E really wants to hold someone's hand, we know that, and the film holds off on that until the very end because it's what we want to see. Or an event, like Ian and Barley needing to complete the spell before sunrise. So, oh, sunrise, we're waiting for that. And it adds a lot of tension to everything. Or moving day in Toy Story 1. Ratatouille doesn't really have that for quite a long time, does it? It ends up being Ego's review, but for the most part, that isn't a destination that the characters are working toward or pose any real challenge over the story's direction. I think it's one of, if not the only Pixar film that doesn't have one of these. Remy wants to cook, sure, but that isn't something you can rightfully hold off on for the audience until the end without kind of cheating us out of the stuff we want to see. All I at least want to see in the movie is Remy succeed. I want to see him cook. I want to see him get to make cool meals and do a good job and be happy because I enjoy that. And we get that early enough in the story to feel like it's a goal that, while conceptually strange, is not entirely out of reach for him. I enjoy watching him cook. I want to see that, and the film wants to show that. But you still need somewhere to go afterward. What do you make the story out of? So from a screenwriting perspective, the solution, the trick, is to give him two goals, a short-term and a long-term one that he doesn't even know about to begin with. His short-term goal is just to cook, to find some way to make food, which is achieved through linguini, and gives us that fix of fun kitchen scenes where we're seeing the thing we think we want to see, which is Remy making food, meeting his short-term needs. The film gets to do stuff in a kitchen like it wants to do. I get to see fun chef stuff and have a relatively feel-good story about Remy rising through the ranks and proving himself like we always knew he could. What a good boy. However, even though these scenes might be enjoyable and like something of a fix of the thing we kind of want, there's definitely a certain pride and fun to be felt when he nails the sweetbread a la Gusteau by changing the sauce. It doesn't measure up to the first time we see Remy really doing his thing. It arrives 25 minutes into the film. Maybe the film's realized it's teased us long enough, and it's stretched that tension and desire to a real peak, and it finally gives us what we want. Remy cooking. But he's not sitting behind a togue, he's not using a proxy, he's leaping and spinning and doing it himself on his own paws. And it is truly, I think, one of the most beautiful scenes of animation I think I've ever watched. I always loved this scene as a kid until today, but I didn't really notice until these rewatches just how emotional this makes me. I've seen this film dozens of times. I'd never done it before. On these recent rewatches, I cried like a fucking baby watching this. Just Leap so joyfully composed this dish and this soup with just such abandon and love. It's just really special. The moment where he changes his mind from self-preservation to really deciding to do what he wants, the music slowly building, the world around him completely fading out. Man, for some reason, the waterworks, I was just bawling. So while Remy's short-term goal might be to cook, this first scene exposes to us what his long-term goal is before even he knows it, which is to do it as himself without hiding. And by showing it with such elation when we first see it, and by cutting it short, the following kitchen scenes of his with linguini feel like a short-term, imperfect replacement. The short-term goal is to find some way to cook, but really, we already know, it's not said out loud, but I just want for the rest of the film after this scene to get back to this feeling. This level of emotion that is never really reached again until much, much later. Still, the proxy works, we get a solution, clunky though it might be, yet the story still has to figure out some things that can go wrong. The characters need to be pushed from this comfortable circumstance in a believable way in order for them to seek better for themselves. Remy and Linguini have no real reason, undisturbed, to move out of this agreement on their own, so you have to figure out a way to write the story in a new direction after this. So the film mines for problems with Ego, with Skinner, and with Remy's family, the latter of which sheds light on Remy's arc. This is a much looser kind of story structure than something like The Incredibles, which I think is why Ratatouille, as being much more primarily a drama than many other Pixar films, at points it can feel like it's like treading water. It enjoys its environment, it enjoys its characters, and yet needs to force itself to find some way to move a broader plot along, to actually find what that plot is as it goes. I think that the element of Linguini being Gusteau's son and the chase down of Skinner's documents feels like a little bit of placation almost, and would understand if someone wasn't sold on that element of the story in particular. Like, oh, we need a different kind of action scene here, and some third thread of the story to string together the middle act, so we'll make something about how Linguini is the secret child of Gusteau to make something happen. I think it's of great benefit to show the restaurant's mounting success at Remy's hands feel like something he grows frustrated with since he isn't getting due credit for it, but the parentage element feels like problem solving for a story in a film where the narrative conflict is not not altogether very obvious. As I've discussed before for films like Finding Dory, I happen to like that feeling of, let's meet this challenge and figure it out, that you can find in some Pixar films, and the actual step-by-step narrative of Ratatouille is one of those times. The studio, down on its hands and knees, trying to figure out a way to get this great concept moving in a way that feels satisfying, interesting, and worth watching. It's really fun to watch them figure it out. By being more of a puzzle of a story, it means that Ratatouille wears a lot more of its emotional content on its sleeve and is quite openly playing toward larger concepts to which an audience might relate than its immediate plot sometimes, I think. The scene of Remy's father showing him the dead rats in the shop window and saying, "This is the way things are, you can't change nature," before Remy comes back with the "change is nature, bitch," is absolutely inviting a deeper read on the way of the world in general and the concepts at play rather than the literal circumstances of the movie here. Like, of course it works on that level, but there's clearly something more. The scene is one of many times where the film is quite clearly calling for us to see the characters as reflecting on wider topics about parents and kids and careers and artists. This might feel to someone like a dad saying to their son, "Hey, look, I know you care about your art, but there's no way you can make a living out of this and you need to accept that." And the kid saying, "I don't believe that, and I'm gonna work for this dream whether you support me or not." That's something the scene could be about to someone, not really about mousetraps, hey. Working on these videos and hearing so many perspectives on a lot of them has taught me a lot of things, but something that recently crystallized for me was how really truly flexible these movies can be to one's own individual perspective in such precise ways. People have left comments on my previous videos getting very real about how the films have related to their own lives in such beautifully particular ways that I could never have expected or guessed, and I'm guessing neither could Pixar. This is one of the most beautiful things about films like this, I think. When it comes to Ratatouille, thanks to its lucid and fluid approach to themes above narrative, I think this kind of flexibility is very apparent here. People, I think, will relate to this film and find that it resonates with them in certain ways that only they can know. I know it does for me. Ratatouille, on its face, speaks about how any artist is valid and to not judge a book by its cover, as it were. That a great artist, hell, a great person, could come from anywhere and should not be limited in their ability to express that love because of where they come from. It's a very universal message, but given how it's staged, Ratatouille speaks to me beyond that of something very specific, something that I bring to it. A little rat who represents an artist's inner self spends time within a safe environment with their family, where they aren't necessarily understood completely, but they aren't out of place either, before eventually being pushed out on their own. Remy, needing to pair with Linguini, combines a voiceless artist that the world doesn't accept, or who doesn't really accept himself, with a hapless klutz who isn't able to get much of anywhere by himself. Remy can't make his way in the world and needs to use Linguini as a human proxy, and it speaks to me of learning to swim in society in general when you first encounter a world that isn't easily navigable, and specifically of masking. Masking is a general term used for a lot of different coping mechanisms and social strategies, which neurodivergent people like myself can sometimes learn to use in order to integrate into a society so that things feel safer, perhaps they draw less attention to themselves, and creates less anxiety out in the world. I know I gained a lot of clarity about my life and my struggles with sociality, friendships, and the way I have behaved and compartmentalized my different aspects of personality when I grew up, when I started looking into neurodivergence as a result of therapy. I learned that compartmentalization of separating myself out into digestible chunks for different people, depending on the situation, has a name, and it's masking. I learned about this frustratingly recently. If you've seen my section on the video game Coffee Talk in my video about 15 non-violent video games, I talked at length about my approach to being a good barista and about developing a carousel of myself in order to appeal to different regular customers I had and have good conversations with them. I was describing the feeling of masking, which I didn't know at that time had a name. I'm not a psychologist, but besides it being relevant to the film, I want to talk about this because I wish I'd known this ages ago, and maybe this will ring some bells for someone who's watching. Of course, we all need to learn how to behave as we grow up, but for neurodivergent people, even the basic play-by-play of interpersonal connections may be completely invisible until they learn, often through failure, shame, humiliation, personal embarrassment, to see the ways in which their own behavior is strange in polite company or in their immediate circumstances and begin to mask so we seem more normal, more like everybody else, so we fit into the world world more easily. So we take up less space, feel less exposed and judged. This involves suppression of certain instincts, pretending and acting, and downplaying certain aspects of our personality in different environments, developing a carousel of personalities depending on whom we're with and where we're going. Just like Remy, at a certain point I must have learned that going out into the world as my actual authentic self was dangerous because it cost me friendships, created more situations of rejection than I knew how to deal with. I started feeling anxious if I was behaving normally. It felt like I wasn't able to pursue opportunities because of who I was, and even if I didn't know what I was doing or why, masking slowly helped me figure out how to present as less of the rat in the room to other people and as more of the linguini. Maybe I still didn't know what I was doing, but at least I looked relatively normal and knew how to appear human. The problem with this is that like a lot of younger people doing that, such as myself, maybe even like older people who haven't looked into this at all, may not know what masking is and just simply think there's something deeply wrong with them. Like, I didn't understand why it was so hard to just be out in the world, or why nobody seemed to accept me for who I was when I wasn't pretending. I didn't know that masking consistently while out in public without having spaces to retreat to, places where I was relaxed and did feel validated by the people around me for who I was and accepted for who I was. Like not having that is exhausting and emotionally devastating if sustained for long periods of time. For like the years after high school, when I'm trying to find my way in the world without the same structure or routine and I don't know how to navigate society, I was masking and losing track of myself amongst all these new places, and it kind of led to a complete disconnection from my feelings, my desires and ambitions, because there was no space in my life where I could be me, where I could look at, or where someone looked at me and was like, oh, I see you. Man, masking's not an evil thing. It helps me fit in and feel comfortable in social situations. I've learned a lot. I'm a lot older now, but it is different for every neurodivergent person. And I am in a space, at least at the moment, where I'm very grateful to have a lot of great friends and live in a space where I can be my actual authentic self in a lot of circumstances. And that is not the case for everybody. Speaking from experiences of having been masking since I was about 13, 14, this originally felt to me as if it was a natural part of growing up and learning how to speak to people, how to be social. I didn't know that just came naturally to some people. It wasn't until years and years and years later, only when I was about 25, that I learned what it was called and realized, no, it's not normal to actually count how many mistakes I made in a day and then whack myself on the head when in private, cursing myself out to do the best I could to not accidentally offend someone again as if I'm fucking Dobby or something. I learned very slowly to socially make my way through the world, how to present myself in like professional circumstances too, scared to death of my inner thoughts being revealed and trying to find the equilibrium between the Remy, the part of me that wanted so consistently to be a certain way, do a certain thing in a certain style, and the part of me that needed to be perceived as normal, needed to sustain friendships, needed to be able to connect with other people. To me, Ratatouille speaks to this very strongly. It's obvious why. I see a lot of my authentic self in Remy and a lot of my masks in Linguini. This battle of neurodivergence trying to integrate into the world through masks and all the many difficulties and benefits that it presents. It helps you communicate. It helps you find friends and like-minded people. It helped me learn new ways to express myself. It helps me with executive functions and day-to-day activity. But it came at the cost of recognizing and loving who I really was. In the movie, it's not Linguini who's making the food after all, and Remy loses himself. Like, he isn't Linguini, he is him, and he needs to recognize that. Ratatouille is such a flexible film in this way, and this is something that I feel I bring to it. It's obviously not a correct answer to any question the film is asking. There's no such thing as that for art. This is not an equation to be solved. But I resonate so deeply with this film on this particular frequency because I have felt so many times like I am piloting a body of myself from an exterior position in order to be seen as someone I feel I'm not, which is a normal dude. I'm not that. I don't think I'm normal. What is normal? Obviously, I'm someone who likes to, in the middle of my multi-hour, multi-year, multi-episode hyperfixation video essay series on a bunch of family movies that nobody asked me to make, occasionally burst into song with no warning. So while the incredibly iconic, deeply felt moment of Ratatouille might be the Anton Ego moment of eating the titular meal, Pixar's, in effect, Ghost of Christmas Future moment for their Ebenezer Scrooge, it's not the dish that really matters of the story to me the most. It's that Remy made it as himself and that he is revealed. It's that he stands with his chest puffed out, knows he is valid the way that he is. His friends know he deserves to be seen the way that he is, and that he is nothing less than the finest chef in France without needing to pretend at all. Ego might have loved the food, but it's the artist who rocks him to his core. The meal may have reminded him of his innermost desires, to feel cared for and comforted, to be in essence loved. And it's a remarkably powerful thing to see and feel from a film that it's captured so well, but he doesn't write about the food in his review. It's not the sliced vegetables and the presentation which moves him to such poetic, self-effacing comment in the following scene. A scene which speaks to the very core of so much of what I believe about both creating art and evaluating it, like I've given so much of my time to. That Remy had reached a place where he could reveal himself fully and honestly to a critic, stand behind himself and allow himself to be perceived completely before he knew what the critic would say, and without a care in the world for what he thought, just because he knew he deserved to take up that space. That's the climax of the film to me. That's the part that really reaches me and is something I wish I could feel for myself as potently every day of the year. It is not always safe to do this. I wish it was. For such an unconventional film to land on such an utterly stunning worldview is positively life-affirming. The film swears at the end of the day that if you, as a person, reveal yourself and honestly engage with someone as your genuine self, and they meet you halfway, do the same thing, something more than mutual understanding can be reached. It's staggeringly hopeful. It's to speak directly to the connections that people can have to each other, whether art's involved or not, when they know themselves and when they accept themselves and present themselves in a fashion they truly believe in. It's blisteringly naive, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in a film. When we approach it as artistry, it doesn't just rely on Remy here, it includes Anton as an equal participant in this process of art being all that it can be. It places an equal amount of weight on the ability of artists to change and reach as it does for audiences to be changed and to be reached, because it takes letting things in. It's such a delicate thing to note that artists aren't really owed this amount of earnestness through great effort. An artist being authentic is not always going to find a willing audience. It takes someone who is willing to admit it. It took Ego facing his own work and being very humble about climbing down from this safe place. If you'll indulge me, my work here on YouTube and my particular approach to creating pieces of critical content in a way I try to make obvious is also an artistic pursuit of mine, is an effort to become as complete a vessel of both sides of the equation that Ratatouille presents here. It's not because of this movie, but it's an easy way to explain it. I want to be an artist who knows themselves and stands behind themselves fully, but also tries to welcome things in the way that Remy and Ego come together at the end here. Years ago, I found that I didn't know myself well enough to be a critic. I wrote it in a video. I didn't love myself enough to be able to see anything in media or express anything from my response to media but the things that I hated, because I didn't know or love me or have the steadiness in myself to put out what I felt into the world in a way that I wanted to. I didn't know what I was feeling. A lot of my early critical work was criticism informed from that very personal place, which I actively took steps to hide. I've spoken about this a lot. I didn't know at the time the extent to which criticism can just be simply sharply and obviously criticism of the self, and so reflective of the speaker's desires and wants. Of course, expertise and knowledge is involved in large part, but to offer a perspective that is truly unique, it takes knowing what that perspective is informed by and working to understand why you want to say it, and that means you need to know yourself. I eventually found that my videos here, like my criticism videos for lack of a better term, is just a way to express part of my authentic self. That I didn't need to just be Ego or just be Remy, I could strive for both at the same time. I could express myself in response to media in my own way. I didn't need to hide how the art really made me feel behind critical language just to make it seem like I was being objective. The pieces of my own personal experience that the film or the game brought out were the most fun part of it. What would be the point in speaking about like lens effects and the process if I didn't also tap into how I as a human responded to those things? I'm never pretending to offer solutions or judgment. I'm offering a perspective, and what makes it mine is the most unique thing I can offer. In a world and on a platform where I've been so hidden behind masks for so much of my life, be they personal or professional or artistic, where it truly can be the hardest thing in the world to feel seen and validated for the person that I am. Sometimes I have to roll up my sleeves and get my own hands dirty looking at myself. When work and emotion gets in the way, I have had to, a lot of times, look in the mirror and go, hey man, if no one else sees you, I see you. A lot of that is making videos. It's like, even if it's just critical content, I'm also putting myself in this because I deserve this space. I deserve to take up this space. It's mine. I deserve to make the things I want to make, and I deserve to present exactly how I want, whether it's moody and dour, or whether I'm bursting into song, because I am nothing less than the finest chef in France. Or whatever. Watching Ratatouille, especially these past few years, has felt as nice and fun and as good a time as it is, perhaps unintentionally, a sharp icicle down the spine. It's about imposter syndrome, it's about masking, it's about judgment of yourself fitting into the world and finding your place within it in all the many ways that you have to give yourself permission to. So maybe I do know why when I see Remy doing it, I cry like I know what it feels like to want that freedom so deeply. To give Ratatouille a particular Micah Edmonds Award of high distinction, I think of any Pixar film, I'd recommend this one to the most people. And by most people, I mean everybody. Even my mum, scared of rats all her life. I think it has something to give everyone who's open to receiving it. It might be the laughs, it might be the fun, it might be the message, it might be inspiration for their next meal. It might be something only they know, that only they bring to it. If I had to pick one film I think everybody in the world should see before they die, it would probably be Ratatouille. However, maybe then you're asking, why is it only my second favorite Pixar film? And it's very difficult to explain, but I think placing it for those reasons at number one would just be self-defeating. If I put it at number one, however weird that might sound, that's not the best way to honor it. It's number two. It's my runner-up, because I truly just think that is where it belongs, that is where it wants to be, that's where it's the most meaningful. To give me the tools to praise another more highly, the number one spot is reserved for what I think is the equivalent of its meal. It's Ratatouille to me. Which of the Pixar films does the thing? There's only one left, I'm sure you can figure it out. Thank you so much for joining me for this penultimate episode of Pixar Quality. I hope you've enjoyed this ride we've been on. If you're new here, there's a whole 21 other film reviews of Pixar movies waiting for you on my channel. We have one more to go, you know what it is, and I'm going to present my final list and general conclusions for now in that episode as well. If you'd like to make sure you catch that, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button under this video as well if you enjoyed it, because it seriously helps. I won't get too sentimental yet, I'll just say, boy howdy, am I excited to tuck into this final episode. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you again soon.